So I know it's probably not the wisest choice to start off a podcast like this, but we're rebels, so we'll do what we want. But I think it's pretty safe to say, Mel, that when it comes to like podcasting, we have little to no idea of what we're doing, and we had even less of an idea when we interviewed our first guest, who we're going to hear from today, Emil Canita. And Mel, I know from having worked with you before, not just on the podcast, that you really like to know what you're doing.
Yes, I do. And I suppose, this comes back to shutting up our internal dialogue. And we're talking about this today in the interview. And I know that was very much a problem for you as well, Erin.
Yeah, I definitely had a little voice inside my head when you came with me with your idea for the human factor. I had this little voice in my head being like, you can't make a podcast. Like, no one wants to hear what you have to say. And it very much was like, when you hear from the Richard Bransons or the entrepreneurs of the world, they sort of always stand up and go, no one believed in my dream, but I persevered and I made it happen. But for me, it was really more like me not believing in my dream, that little internal voice not believing in my dream. Everyone else was like, yeah, go for it. That's going to be awesome. But it was me not believing in my dream. And if it wasn't for you, Mel, I don't know if I ever would have taken that step forward.
So at what stage did you actually shut up your internal dialogue?
Well, I can really clearly remember I was on a Skype call with yourself and friend of the show, Nick, from Where There's Smoke. And he just sort of was like, so, yeah, you're going to be the co-host, right, Erin? And I was like, well... No, I don't think so. And I can remember you laughing your head off, Mel, because you were like, I want her to be. And actually after that Skype call, I thought, well, maybe I could be. And then you took that, and as you do, Mel, you ran, and next minute I was co-host.
And I think that also this comes back to, surrounding yourself with people who believe in you. And Emil, talk about that today in the interview.
Yeah, I really liked what he said about, recognizing what you lack in skills and surrounding yourself with people who like not only believe in what you're trying to achieve, but can complement you with skills that you lack. And I think we've been worked pretty hard to make that happen for ourselves as well, Mel.
We did. And this also comes back to, just be who you are and not try to be someone that you're not. Because when we were trying to find our fate with this podcasting business, I suppose, we were trying to even give each other's role that were not quite what we had in mind, and we were discussing question, and I think just when we look at our style and we kind of came back to our personalities and trying to let our personality shine, I think that's where we started to find our niche. Would you say, Erin?
Absolutely. And also it even was for when we started up, like my niche was to sort of sit back and be like, I don't know if this is going to work, if anyone's going to listen to us. And you, Mel, you're so action oriented. You were kind of the one that took the leap into the unknown, and I sort of just got pulled behind you into the unknown. And I think Emil talks about this so much in his interview coming up about the need to leap into the unknown, and to make that leap with people that believe in you and that can complement you. And so I think that's really interesting and exciting, whether it comes to starting up your own action group or starting up your wee little podcast project.
Welcome to The Human Factor, the show where we explore social change through the eyes of social entrepreneur and nonprofit advocates. My name is Melanie Rousset, her name is Erin McKay, and we are your hosts.
Today, for our first show ever, we talk to Emil Canita, an award-winning university student who changed the face of gender sexuality in our home in Queensland, Australia. Emil is our first guest, not only on the show, but in a series where we'll explore the spark, that moment or idea that launches someone to create social change.
Let's start the show.
Mel and I are here today with Emil Canita, a third-year uni student studying a Bachelor in Social Science, majoring in Health and Policy. But it's safe to say that Emil's not a typical uni student. In fact, a lot of people think your career starts after uni, but Emil didn't want to wait until graduation to start making a social impact, did he, Mel?
No, he didn't, Erin. Emil was only in his second year when he founded the first sexual health action group called SHAG at the University of Queensland, right here in Australia. This year, he also took on the role of Gender Sexuality VP at his university, plus he works at the Rapid Clinic and the Queensland Positive People. Hi, Emil. It's quite an impressive CV you've got there. How would you describe yourself?
Hey, how are you? How would I describe myself? Basically, I'm a gay guy who likes to talk about sex. That's what I kind of look at the whole thing in a nutshell, because if you see there with the gender and sexuality, it's mostly primarily focusing on LGBTIQ issues, or some people would call it queer. And then with the work in Rapid and Queensland Positive People, although you would say it goes around sexual health, predominantly it's about HIV. So a gay man who likes talking about sex, I guess, just like every other gay man.
So, Emil, what does a typical day look like for you? I mean, you're working at two different organizations as a staff member while also studying and, a lot of extracurriculum at university. What's a typical day for you?
So in the morning, me and my friends at 6 o'clock go out and do some CrossFit. And then when I get home, I go to university and basically do some uni. And then that's where I kind of fit in my work in the union as well. And then by midday, I either travel to my role as doing communications and design with Queensland Positive People. And on Sundays, I do it working in the clinic. So I kind of just try and every time, I guess when I got offered the roles, I kind of negotiated with them that these were the other roles that I was doing and I would like to work around it. I guess I was lucky enough that they did allow me to have all of these positions. But yeah, I have to admit, there's always there's always a time throughout the year where you get hit by crippling anxiety and depression, so you don't end up doing all of your role. But it's just one of those things. I guess I'm kind of just got used to having this much workload that I couldn't do any less, if that makes sense.
Unfortunately, that will probably make sense to a lot of the people listening in the not-for-profit industry. Yeah. And so is that sort of what you've done today? Have you been up since 6 a.m.?
Pretty much.
So what I like about your story, Emil, and especially, with SHAG, is that you came up with an idea, something that you were passionate about, I guess, and you saw a need in the marketplace, around you, and you just turned that idea into, an action group. So from my perspective, having an idea is one thing, but making it happen is another thing altogether. And so I suppose for all the entrepreneurs out there, tell us what it takes to launch an action group like SHAG.
I think firstly it's blind faith. It's like jumping off a cliff, to be honest with you. When I first came up with it, I threw it to one of my friends and she was like, yeah, you know what, this might actually work. And I felt lucky that I had her, because I guess when you kind of come up with a team, you have the ideas person and you have the organization person. Annie Danks, who was the VP Gender and Sexuality the year before me, was basically my co-founder and trying to get SHAG happen. And she was that person. She was the organization person. She knew everything to how to establish it, where I just basically fed her the ideas. So yeah, it's kind of I just got really lucky that I managed to find people around my life who had the skills that I didn't have then. And then, yeah, pretty much from then on, we kind of just pushed through and try to make it work. But yeah, in a nutshell, it's pretty much just blind faith. I mean, I guess I wasn't really if I was gonna fail, I knew it wasn't the end because I didn't really had anything to lose. Like I was gonna do something, and if I do get something, that's great. But if I don't get anything from it, I guess at least I gave it a shot, and I wouldn't be looking back at it and said, "Oh, I should have done this."
Absolutely. And so SHAG has actually been quite a success, winning a lot of awards. Did you have a vision for this success, or was it just something that grew organically from your idea?
I was surprised actually when we won some awards, because when first coming up with SHAG, personally, I was having a lot of doubts with it because every time I talk to people about sexual health, it basically reaffirmed the issues I thought the general discussion on sexual health was, which was whenever you talk to people about sex, they always think about it like the gays. They put sex and gays together in just one clump without realizing that sex is actually something that most people do. So, throughout the initial months of setting up SHAG, most people just kept on telling me, "Oh, is this part of the Queer Collective? Is this a gay project?" And I'm like, "No, it's for you."
Absolutely. So you've sort of touched on there being that misconception that sexual health is really only for the gay community. But what I also wanted to ask about, with SHAG being a youth-led movement, which is very a hot topic in the world at the moment, youth leading youth, considering that you guys were a bunch of uni students, what's the biggest misconception you encountered as a uni student trying to affect social change?
Try to make it seem like we're doing something even though it's not doing any effect whatsoever.
Yeah.
And it's usually coming out as well from older generations when they're like, "Oh, you seem like you're doing something, but are you actually doing something?" And it goes around the idea that you can always measure your outcomes, like having a conversation with someone on sexual health and alleviating their anxiety around it is something that you just can't measure or put a number on. When we're so focused sometimes on measuring whatever these outcomes are about, we tend to always think that the world revolved is a vacuum, but it's not. If me talking to another person about sex, which has been quite stigmatized for quite a long time, and them realizing that it's something that's normal to talk about, maybe then it would have a trickle effect with the people they're surrounded with, their friends, their family, or whatever. And then that way, we can have this social change going on where there is a lot more sex positivity. But obviously, how are you going to measure that? It's not like we're going to follow the person around and talk to them about it. Just definitely that. It was definitely,
follow them into the bedroom.
Yeah, right? Look, I'm sure it's possible, but it's one of those things. It's like people always try to expect that here we are, that we're able to show you the outcomes of our work, where in reality, when it comes to creating social change, it takes a lot of time, and sometimes you don't really get to see it until towards probably the end of your life.
It's a really good point.
It's a really good point.
Yeah, and we're so obsessed sometimes with trying to find out the change, but in reality, we can't force it. It will just organically happen.
Very true. I'm sure that's a topic that's very close to Erin's heart as well, going to school and talking to students about cervical health and sexual health in general as well. Would you say, Erin?
Yeah, it's, as you say, Emil, it's not something that literally tomorrow I can turn around and say, did these children's behavior change? That's something that maybe will be shown in 10 years. I understand what you're saying about an obsession of our culture, especially when it comes to, say, maybe even garnering financial support.
Exactly.
What is the measurable outcome when, in fact, as you say, when you're talking about topics such as sexual health and any sort of global social change, it really needs to be a long-term view. Yeah.
I'm curious, Emil, about, so you built your own organization, I suppose, and I'm curious to see how was the transition from, being your own boss and leading your own show and then going on to being actually a staff member of this organization. How was that transition for you?
I have to admit it has been quite personally tough for me. Because being a young person as well, I guess a lot of the ideas I have are being pushed back because they're like, "Oh, what do you know? You've just come into this space, you haven't worked here for long enough." Or there's a bit of a mistrust into my methods because I guess I have to admit, for me, I do love the idea of taking risks. Like I said, with getting SHAG happening, it was more of all right, I want to get this happening because this hasn't been done before. What if we do it this time? And if it works, great. If it doesn't, well, it doesn't. That's just how it is. That's just how life is. I think in its essence, it revolves around the culture of being afraid to not make mistakes, or the idea of risk aversion, which is, I think, is quite a naive way of looking at the world. Like everything we do involves risk. And sometimes, yes, like you do take a lot of risks to try and achieve something good, but I think we need to foster a culture that's more risk savvy and not risk averse.
I had the same problem through my career, is that aversion to change, I suppose. And I think that the answer to that is we're fundamentally uncomfortable with the unknown, you know?
Yeah.
And as much as we talk about measurement just a little bit before, which I think is very important to measure the outcome of what we do, also sometimes we actually just take a bet, don't we? We explore, and human nature is actually very unpredictable. So we won't know until we actually get out there and try it. And I think that was a big part of your success with SHAG.
So you're obviously quite driven by the LGBTI cause, and the work that you've been doing in that space has clearly helped people who identify as part of that community. And what I'm wondering is how your journey in this work, exploring, the themes and the ideas that come out of this community, how has that actually helped you in your journey as a young gay man?
If there's one thing, it definitely made me realize how complicated the world is. From sexuality to gender to identities, it showed me a different way of defining people. Like a different way of looking at marketing, for example. Like, if you went to any marketing class now, they always go on the idea of profiling people, coming up with a stereotype, and that's how you target people. And I think it's rather, I mean, I get the logic around it, but at the same time, I think it doesn't take into account the complexity of how we are as humans, really.
And so would you say that that's affected the way that because you're working in communications with Queensland positive people. So how, as you say, you learn this stuff in uni, and a lot of people think when they come out of uni, what they've learned in class is law for the real world. And what's been your experience in taking those notions that you just talked about in terms of classifying people and using the communications in Queensland positive people?
Well, essentially now, since I got the role a couple months ago, I did not use people on any of my marketing materials. I always focus more, like, it's basically anti-tokenism, because when you go on tokenism, it always be like, oh, do we have a white person in? Do we have an Asian person in? Do we have and it's kind of like, does it really matter, or can we just rather focus on the idea of feeling intimate with someone, being in love again? Because I think these are universal emotions. These are universal experiences. And rather than focus so much on the differences, why don't we focus on the commonalities?
And you so make a valid point. In a lot of organizations, I know for a fact that that's a conversation that the marketing team has. Is there a woman? Is there a man? Is there a Asian person? Is there an African American person?
Yep.
No, we can't use that picture because it's all white women, and so it's a conversation. So you make a really interesting point there.
And I don't think it's genuine. This is one thing I always want to make, if there's one thing I've learned from working in this space, if you go out there with a very genuine and thoughtful idea, people get it. People latch onto it and they appreciate it. They know when you're doing it just because.
So if you could leave just one message with the people at home that you want them to remember, just, they didn't remember anything else that you spoke about, which would be a shame for them, but that they will actually take to heart, what would you like them to remember? What would that be?
To just jump off the cliff. If you're, call a lifeline if this is, if you're feeling suicidal. But if you have any idea, anything you want to do, just do it. Just do it. Just because in the end of the day, like I said, you really have nothing to lose, and you just gotta learn to sometimes give it a go. Life has its weird ways sometimes of trying to make things make sense for you, and it's understandable that you'd be afraid sometimes and you think you're gonna fail, but don't let that internal dialogue put you down.
That's such a beautiful message to leave our listener with today, Emil. And I suppose, this is a nice place for us to wrap up. I mean, we could chat with you all day.
Thank you.
It's so interesting and there's so much insight into what you're seeing. I think you're very wise beyond your young years, that's for sure. What I'm interested to do is a bit of a shout out, I suppose, Emil. If people want to follow you or connect with you or your work, where can they find you?
They can find me on Facebook. So I'm one of those millennials who only spend like my time in one social media, I know, but I don't have anything else. But if you could look me up on Facebook with my name, Emil Horbags, please follow, message me, be a friend, because I'm always keen to talk to people about life and sex and gay.
That is awesome. Thank you so much, Emil.
Emil, I just wanted to say thank you so much for being our first guest on The Human Factor. And I have no doubt when the episode does air, you will get a lot of connections on Facebook, people wanting to chat sex.
Yes, me. But no booty calls, sorry.
So Emil today talked about sex and love as being universal. And I suppose this is no different than what I had in mind when I first came up with the idea of having this podcast. I had two words in mind, I suppose, wanting to create a community and wanting to do good.
Yeah, actually, Mel, I can remember in the pub when you first told me about the Human Factor. Great to work with Mel because she always takes you out for a pub meal. And I can remember quite clearly 3 words from that lunch. You kept talking about community, you kept talking about change, and you kept talking about this idea of goodness. And I can so clearly remember that. But Mel, you actually also talked about in the podcast with Emil about how humans are inherently afraid of change. Like they as much as they desire change, they're really afraid of it. And I guess that comes back to what we were talking about at the beginning about how to facilitate social change, you kind of have to just take a leap into the unknown. And if, as Emil puts it, if you have an idea, anything that you want to do, just do it. Just do it. Just do it. And I think that's so important, that if you want to facilitate social change, sometimes you have to know that you don't have all the answers, but what you can do is you can take a step of blind faith and you can take a leap into the unknown.
Yes, and that's exactly what we did. Thank you so much to Emil Canita for being our first guest on the show. And thank you to you, all of our listeners, for the first ever Human Factor podcast.
If you enjoyed the episode, please head over to iTunes and rate us, or you can head to our Facebook page, The Human Factor, and hit like and join in the conversation. Tell us what you thought of our first episode, and if you have any thoughts or insights to add to anything Emil or we have said today, please leave us a comment.
Or you can tweet us at _Human Factor, or visit the website at humanfactor.com.au, and you can leave us a voicemail or a message. This show is just one part of a community that wants to affect and grow social change. So if you have a topic or a person that you'd like us to feature on a future show, please let us know. And if you'd like me to coach you or your team on how to build your tribe, email me at melanie@humanfactor.com.au.
Thanks so much. You're all awesome. See you next time. Was that all right? Like, that's just...
I think it's perfect. I think we just cut it down and we call this one a day. We've done it.